Hi, I'm Michelle Olivier, and you're listening to Hey, I Want Your Job, the podcast that looks at amazing jobs and what it takes to get them. Hey, welcome to Hey, I Want Your Job. And I really wish on this episode that I was cool enough to have this job. I have been accused of being in this space, and I would like to set the record straight that I am not. And we will talk more about that in a minute. But to get started after that very cryptic, delightfully cryptic, I think, intro, Farzin, what is your job title?
I am I own my own company, but I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant.
So let's start with that. Diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. These days, there's DEI, there's DI, there's DE and I is the latest that I have been corrected on. Talk to me about the difference as you see it and what's right, what's wrong.
So, yeah, I mean, acronyms change with society, things come up, things are left out, things need to be kind of reintroduced at times. So, we definitely want to include equity into this conversation. It's the E is very important for me. I actually named my company Critical Equity Consulting because of the fact that I wanted to center equity because have a organizational systems focused work. So, but I mean I typically use DEI. I'm not too big on acronyms. I'm more concerned about like getting the concepts right.
Right.
But
Call
the
me a
D
wombat wrangler as long as you listen to what I say. That's kind of the take on
right.
it.
Yeah, and there are new things pop like now people are talking about centering justice. So the term Jedi has come up as a justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, or these things will change. I'm actually trying to eventually move to rebranding from doing DEI to referring to myself as an organizational justice consultant.
Well, I
But we
had
can
seen that and I thought I love that idea. I love the idea because I feel like sometimes when we talk about it as diversity, equity, and inclusion, that those make it sound almost like nice to haves as opposed to calling it social justice, which is, a fundamental and universal right, and I think that it gives it the gravitas that it deserves as a topic. And so I am here for it. If I can help that catch on, I'm down. Just let me know, because I do think that one of the things that I get frustrated with is when people do say, "Oh, so you're a DEI person." No, I am not. I'm just a human who's not an asshole. So I try to be understanding and inclusive, but I am not an expert in this work. I cannot help your organization move forward. I can't help you. I don't know the things that you know and that other people in your space know that make you the person to pay to do that. Can I tell you that you should probably hire some people that aren't white dudes? Yeah, I can tell you that, but I feel like you didn't need to pay me to hear that. And in the recruitment space, I can say, hey, these things that you're doing are definitely racist. Maybe we should stop. But I can't necessarily define an overarching strategy. That's not me. So my first question for you is along those lines. We hear so many people claiming to be DEI people right now. If you're an organization who is ready to invest and really wants to get somebody who knows their shit, other than just coming and hiring you, which is obviously the right choice, what should they look for in a consultant and the expert to bring in?
Sure, yeah. So it I think if the organization's committed to justice and committed to alleviating some of the historical injustices that have plagued not only like society but actually our workplaces all these years, I think you want somebody that understands the interplay between individuals and systems. You want somebody that's not solely focused on interpersonal interaction and then like recruiting, because so much of the DEI space up until now has been focused solely on diversity. It's like, we want the difference in the room, but we don't know how to, allow for positive interactions of difference, and then we don't know how to dismantle the structures that prevent certain people from, upward mobility or any sort of like growth in your organization. So the consultants that typically refer to equity and justice in their conversations and really have a more systemic overview of how to kind of go about doing this work, because good workplace policies, environments, and cultures create the behavioral change that you want, rather than encouraging people yourself by like, saying, hey, you should do this. Yeah, that's part of it, like the bias training, and then like the how to interact with your colleagues is part of it, sure. But you really want to kind of create an atmosphere where these sort of things are being checked systemically and accountability is built into the system. So if you're actually trying to do the real work, there are plenty of consultants that have taken on this sort of approach. And to be honest with you, the best ones that I've particularly seen that have the greatest results and are able to kind of truly change environments and cultures are ones that are talking about systems, and ones that have a critical analysis of culture, right? They can deconstruct and reconstruct reality in ways that like it's not just surface level, right? It's not a few interventions that may change your demographic numbers, or may slightly uptick engagement, or kind of like, yeah, you want that, and you want retention and things like that. But the consultants that are able to kind of go deep into your organization and see, is the policies and procedures like set up for this, and is the culture in a way that can can account for those differences in the space.
So that's really interesting. I was on a panel, I was moderating a panel the other day, kind of in this space. And it was really, we had kind of a disagreement on the panel. I'd love to have you weigh in on something.
Sure.
On the one hand, we had people who recommended that a great way that at a certain point to create change in your workplace, you just have to mandate some stuff. And that doing things like mandating that everybody has your pronouns on your email signature and on Zoom and that sort of thing, what that does is normalizes that within your organization. So people who would have normally been nervous to do that, suddenly everybody's having to do it. So it's an equal playing field. And for people who were unaware of why that was important, it's a continual reminder, and it's a clear statement that the company that this is a value of the company and the company has your back. At the same time, somebody else argued forcing something like that is not going to change hearts and minds. And that instead you should do more of a like softly, hey, did you know that people don't always prefer the same pronouns that you think that they present as? And maybe you should ask. And we kind of hit this impasse of these two ideas. I know which dog I back, but I've been wrong before in my life. So I am interested to hear what your take is on that kind of fundamental kind of sort of challenge.
Yeah. So I wrote an article like about the quick wins of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Like, so small measures that
I might have read it.
well, thank you. These types of small measures of things that we call quick wins that are easy to do, is that basically like kind of are nice ways of showing sort of solidarity in the workplace, like small gestures that take on the life of its own, right? Like that we focus then on, okay, so let's just the quick wins are the wins, like, right? So they're great to kind of build momentum and build some degree of rapport. It should be voluntary, right? Like nobody should be forced into anything that they don't want to, but like it, you explain why, you explain exactly what's happening. Great, right? If it has some degree of positive outcome and shows some degree of solidarity, and your employees are becoming more engaged and kind of having a, to be honest with you, a better relationship with their labor because of that, great. Typically, that's not going to happen, right? We like the true thing that we want to do is dismantle like heteropatriarchy, heteronormativity, and the true systems that are of oppression. Changing your pronouns isn't going to do that. It's a small notch of resistance to a otherwise oppressive system, right? And so, like, we've done these types of gesture types of resistance all throughout our lives, all throughout humanity. When you have an oppressive system and you're confronting it overtly, you will get harmed. So we try and make tiny incremental changes to be able to hopefully chip away at that. My approach is the deep revolutionary uprooting approach, where I believe that if there is this type of, I mean, there is, like, no matter what, no matter how progressive you are, the heteropatriarchy, the patriarchy is still in the room, right? Like, you can't escape it because your organization is not separate from society. It's a part of it. You bring yourself to work, you bring your parents to work, you bring your ancestors to work, you bring that into your conversation, I'm bringing that into my conversation here with you, and then I'm going to take from it, right? So, but like, you can't separate that, right? So
Right.
patriarchy is always there. The more we can do to kind of really get people to understand this is the oppressive system that we live in, and this is forcing people to live in this real world, real material world that is harming them, right? As opposed to strictly focusing on the positives. Like, hey, this is good. This is fun. This makes me feel good temporarily, right?
Yeah.
But I'm going to confront daily this oppressive system that's materially harming my mental well-being, my prospects for growth, my ability to kind of liberate my own identity and labor together, right? Like, so yeah, I mean, great. Like, I think I don't, when there are those, like, sort of small gestures that pop up, like, I think, if people are into it, there's nothing wrong with it, right? So long as that doesn't become the sole purpose. Like, it doesn't,
Right.
changing your pronouns isn't going to dismantle an oppressive system.
One of the points that the person arguing for that policy was making was that they felt like it was, and by mandating it, what it was saying was that this is where we are, and no, this makes you uncomfortable, this is no longer a place for you to work. That if you are not comfortable with pronoun fluidity and being respectful of people's differences in that way, this isn't a place for you to work. And maybe that's not a great way to approach it in that particular example, but I do see, and I have heard expressed frustration from DEI people who've been brought in and HR people in the field who the company has decided somehow at this level, holy crap, we've been jerks. Maybe we should stop. And they really want to send the message that if you are of the good old boy mentality, you should probably start looking for a new job. Now, me being me, my answer is, well, pretty simply, why don't you just have a meeting and say that to the whole company, and let people decide? But apparently HR people tend to feel that that's a little overstating. What would you think would be a signal that that's not just virtue signaling, that they really mean it and they intend to follow through, and would communicate that both to people they're trying to support and the people that they need to lose as an organization?
So That's a really good question. That's a little tough. Like, you know, you have to balance your organizational well-being with, you know, the creating positive outcomes in the workplace, right? Like, um, you, it is difficult to police that kind of thought process so long as, like, you know, there's no material effect. If that person has a certain degree of understanding of gender and sexuality that that is outdated, frankly, and shouldn't have ever been
Yeah.
thought, um, if they are materially harming other employees, or if there's evidence that, you know, they're a manager and like there's performance ratings that are favorable to certain demographics over others, yeah, you know, that's a real world effect of those things. And if that person's conversations and thoughts are vocal to be able to harm, like then you should be firm. Yes, we are an inclusive. It's built into our value structure. So when you violate that, you're harming the organization and our values, right? So first and foremost, like your DEI policies and ideas and values should be so deeply ingrained in the organization that anything deviating from that is an affront to the organization, and like even like productivity and output and things like that. In those situations, like, you know, I think it's very circumstantial, and like if somebody like we don't want to get to the point where DEI practitioners are viewed as like
Thought police.
thought police, right? There is a certain degree of accountability that we have to build into the system.
Besides,
Um,
HR has been the fun police for years. DEI better back off. They've got that
right,
zone.
right. Um, so and honestly, like you know, there you pick your battles, right? Like, so it's a barometer, right? If
Mhm.
somebody's so far into some ideological pattern that is harming them, not only like others but themselves, and like, you know, that they're actually negatively affecting the workplace, then that's a decision you have to make. Like, can we put this person on any type of program to assist them, or is it just a matter of that we need to get this person out of here? Like, they're really like hurting things.
Yeah,
If
I
there are
think
some, yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, I think it's really interesting because we're at such a polarized place right now culturally where I'm trying to put myself back in the shoes of being an employee. And it's been a minute. But like I know as a BIPOC queer woman, if I were going into the office and I pull up at the same time as my manager and their car is covered in Trump stickers, they could never say anything that was innately problematic 9 to 5. And I would feel unsafe in that environment because I would feel judged, even if they
Yeah,
weren't. And so I think right now it's really difficult to quantify. Like I hear exactly what you're saying. And the HR girl in me is going, absolutely, we need a clear measure. Give me a survey. Right. But at the same time, I also appreciate that we are at this like place as a society that we've not been before, where something as simple as a party alignment, even without ever saying anything else, might make somebody feel innately unsafe. And I don't know what the answer is to that because it's not fair to say nobody hires Trump supporters, but
right.
also I will tell you straight up, my company does not
Can't,
hire Trump supporters.
yeah, and you can't discriminate based on political affiliation.
I
Like,
mean, you can, I'm a private company in Texas. I can do whatever I want.
sure, well, yeah, yeah. Um, well, I mean, you know, somebody will take you to court if they come in a car with Trump stickers, and you know they're not doing anything harmful in the workplace, and then they get fired all of a sudden. Um, you know, that's a court case, right? Like, you know, you're bound
We're
to
an
get sued.
at-will state. So I mean, it'd be a really long slog to prove it. It's hard enough to prove active discrimination in Texas, let alone on things that are protected classes. And as you know, politics is not a protected class. So,
Yeah. Well,
but I still see your
it may be
point. Like that is
yeah.
a total digression about my very specific situation. But my point is organizationally, that's really problematic because, you know, normal companies don't want to just say we don't support people. And then on the flip side, Trump supporters may feel like if I've got my car covered in, you know, Biden, that they feel unsafe, that they assume that they're being judged and assume that they're a racist. So it certainly cuts both ways right now.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess if you want to think of it objectively, it, you know, in reality it doesn't. But like, um, but yeah, like no, I think that's not something that the DEI should be going into kind of those types of conversations. Yes, like there's a your degree of safety, you know, is something that like DEI practitioners aren't really involved in, right? Like it's typically HR or risk management or anything like that. That's kind of involved in specific workplace safety issues. The DEI realm can inform exactly why that person may feel unsafe or why that like the sort of like the justice component, the history component, like can you know even DEI is like is is reluctant to kind of get involved in employee relations. I've known DEI practitioners and I've done it myself that have gotten involved in employee relations cases because there's a cross cultural or a cross racial element to the conversation, but I mean that's not typically you know it's I like to think of DEI as in this lofty sort of above, like, you know, the bare minimum HR, right? Like, this is what you are doing. This is the law. This is like absolute, like, zero or the bare minimums of creating like an organization that, you know, isn't going to get in trouble. DEI tends to operate in the above bubble, right? Like, so, you know, we know that there's a diversity element. We know there's an inclusion element where people are kind of like interacting with one another. Then there's the equity element to the system and structure of how like are we dismantling barriers and then how are we allocating resources. So for questions like that, like I have always so in my past, like, you know, it was easy. So when I worked in local government, that was a violation of Hatch Act, and like, you know, you couldn't really have like political paraphernalia on you know, government grounds, right? Like so, or public grounds. So like when you were coming into the workplace, right?
Mhm.
So even if it wasn't, like it was typically part of the employee manual. Like don't advertise for any particular candidate or anything like that on on these grounds and stuff like that. And so, and that was a clear if that was a violation, it was a violation, etc. In private sector, yeah, it's a little tricky. I mean, like it depends on your organization. If your organization is progressive and they don't want these type like this kind of individual, like you really got to make, you know, it's the case of what are they doing, you know, rather than what is their own like internal kind of thought process. Obviously, your internal thought process is going to manifest itself into reality. Like they're going to do something problematic if they have problematic thoughts. Like it's your driver, um, but you know, I wouldn't. That's a tricky one because like it's you know you're going into like areas that you know DEI really wants to avoid, right? Um,
So that's interesting though, because I guess I am particularly radical. So I guess, and I should have explained this at the beginning. I personally am of the opinion that there should not be HR anymore, that we should have a really
I agree.
great internal system that handles paperwork. We should have a legal team and risk team that define policies that impact on that. And then we should have really well-trained managers who
Mhm.
handle their shit. And then we should have DEI that make sure that we are being inclusive of all of the things, that we are showing equity and justice to all of our employees. And that's, for me, that's kind of how the structures should be. And so in that model, DEI would need to be they would be the voice of the people almost in the same way. Like, I think you had a post the other day that talked about DEI is more of what was you said it, like a union leader, than an HR functionality. And so like, in representing that person, like, hey, my people feel unsafe because in the same way a union leader would be like, you can't make them not, work through their lunch break. They need to eat. You can't make them work for somebody who clearly has a problem with their lifestyle and their skin color. So I guess for me, that was kind of where I was coming from for why that would be under that purview. But I do realize that is a fairly radical departure of thought from where reality sits.
There's reality and there's where we want to take it, right? Like, so in reality, like, the DEI practitioner as it currently is, like I was speaking, like when I made that post, I was very serious, like, right. I do come from a radical tradition, and like my idea of like sort of kind of power sharing and dismantling the structure of a hierarchical capitalist inspired organization, where like power and wealth is concentrated at the top. I'm interested in dismantling that, right? DEI as it is, like the way the majority of DEI is at this point, is not. DEI is very much aligns with, similar to what HR is, and HR was kind of more or less created as a way to give people just enough so that they don't
they're maintenance for the cogs.
Right.
That's it. Where the humans are the cogs. That's it. They're just maintenance.
Absolutely. It's maintenance. It's a pressure release valve. Like, it's, give just enough, figure out how to give just enough, just so like, things don't like completely collapse into chaos, or anarchy, not chaos, anarchy. So like, so that, and DEI's similar, like, unfortunately it's similar role, right? Like, right now, as it is, the DEI is an industry that's focused on business well-being, and business well-being typically reflects the needs of the elite, of the very top of the organization. DEI is not a representative field, right? It's, you're not a union rep when you're a DEI practitioner. So that's the reality. So like, I don't want to give people any advice that's going to get them in trouble, right? Like,
sure. Yeah.
On my own personal view,
yes. I want to know what you personally think. Like, you and I are ready to go burn down like all of the structures together, I think, my friend, and dance gleefully in the smoke. So you're welcome to go there with me, and we'll put a caveat that says, don't try this at home, because they still find your paycheck. Like, so one of my big things, because again, I'm in recruitment, one of my huge things is there is no way to get around the fact that a resume is a fundamentally racist tool. And so if you are basing your recruitment on a resume, your fundamental way that you are measuring people to bring them into your organization is predicated on a racist tool. You can say whatever the hell you want to say about how committed you are to diversity and blah, 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 blah. But as long as everything you do is based on using a racist tool, you're still a racist.
Yeah.
You can be maybe like a recovering attempted racist, but you're still there, my friends. And you're not just racist, because they're not just racist. They're also sexist. They're also ageist. They're also, homophobic. They're also all of the other isms. Basically, the worst of what our society has is all completely encapsulated in them. So like, I am with you. I also understand that when I work with my clients, I can do things to softly, gently show them a different path. I can say, hey, have you thought about why this is a terrible tool? Here's 15 reasons, one of which is it's racist. But I'm also probably going to have to engage with resumes in order to keep being paid to be a recruiter. I just working within the system helps me move the needle. So I feel you, I guess is what I'm trying to say on that. And it is really, really frustrating. So if I gave you a magic crayon and said, go redesign an F100 to actually support these objectives of social justice, inclusion, all of that, where would you start? What would you do?
If
You don't have to worry about pissing anybody off. You
blank
just
slate.
blank slate, go nuts.
It would be a worker-owned organization. It would be one that there is power is diffused, decision making is diffused, right? Like it's democratized. There are different models for this. Like one of my friends, Ted Rao, he's a theorist on sociocracy. He works with organizations to kind of develop this sort of power sharing system where decision making is done through these systems of circles, like that are questions and decisions are kind of given to these circles, and then they all cooperate to make these decisions. Every worker has an equity share of the organization. There is so much democracy and so much distributed wealth that there's no need for a union, because you're essentially a union, right? You are the union. You are the workers. I believe fundamentally in that sort of power sharing scenario where there's the hierarchy is completely dismantled, or at least mostly dismantled, and the organization is culturally flat, ideally structurally flat as well. Those have the best, I truly believe this, that is the best foundation for a good DEI program. You already have the equity, much of the equity element in there, right? Everything you are involved in equity is righting societal wrongs in your organization. That is where your equity program goes. If you are in a scenario where power is distributed, obviously you're going to have to do a lot of training to get people up to speed on how to do this, and people who have been marginalized over time and told to be quiet will require extra training, right? Like to be like, hey, like, go ahead, I know you're socially conditioned by these horrific systems that we have. So there's a different level of training there. And so ideally, yeah. You okay? Okay. So ideally, like this power sharing structure, I believe, is the foundation to a good DEI. Otherwise, so you have what I call like neoliberal DEI, which is corporate DEI. Like you have, it's what we were talking about, mirrors HR. It is there to kind of protect the organization and kind of make it performative and seem like they're doing some stuff with some minor degree of accountability and change. Sure, is happening, right? Like, then you have real organizations that are really, really committed to this, that are providing opportunity for people to actually contribute to the function of the organization and have a stake in the outcome, have a stake in their own output. They're liberating the organization is run by the people, so the people liberate their own labor, sort of kind of thing, right? Like, and with that sense of liberation is a parallel to liberating your identity. So when I believe that I have power in the workplace, I can show up authentically. I don't have to like go around training people. Hey, this is how you be authentic in your workplace, right? You create the system and the environment for it. People will be themselves. Like, that's what being yourself is.
You don't have to work at it. You just do it.
You don't have to work at it. The only thing that's stopping you from being yourself is social constraint, right? There's so many, like now, a lot of these like quote unquote DEI practitioners are focused solely on authenticity or solely on these individualistic approaches to a corrupt system. Like, you have the power to do, like, okay, somebody can tell me that all day, but if I'm getting hurt day in and day out, and somebody says, "Oh, you need to be more authentic," get out of my face. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
ideally, I mean, it's power sharing, worker owned. Whether or not they make it into the top 100 companies is not really a concern of mine. Um, I mean, success is not defined by growth, I think, anymore. It should not be anymore because of, we're destroying the planet and all that. But that's another conversation.
So, are there any organizations right now that give you hope that you look at and you think, okay, they're listening, they're getting it right, and where you feel like there's a lot of movement in the right direction there? Because I'm frustrated and I'm not finding a lot of hope. So I'm genuinely asking, not for a friend.
Yeah, so actually, Dr. Richard Wolf, I think his name is, at the Democracy at Work. He has a website. He talks about worker-owned operations, a lot like cooperatives or employee-owned. There is Project Equity based out of Chicago that's actually helping organizations kind of set up and for raise capital for employees to buy out their factories. And there's a lot of co-ops that are forming, like, under the radar. So like I've heard of, what is it? Kind of taxi services or like ride sharing apps or whatever that are not like Uber, like not centralized. There is one institution that is called, I'm probably going to butcher, but it's looks like Mondragon, right? The Mondragon Corporation, based out of Basque Country in Spain. Massive co-op. They even have their own university that's
Oh,
teaching
wow.
stuff. There's a lot of like cooperative sort of organizations that are popping up in California. Food co-ops are starting to become huge. So there's this, like, it's even the Aspen Institute, which is not known to be very progressive, is writing, at least in the past, is writing a lot about like these types of worker-owned arrangements, right? And so there are various models, which is encouraging. So there's not a one size fits all, and there's not a one size fits all in how democratic an organization is. Like, you can vote through consensus, you can have referendums in your organization, just like any sort of political mirroring that you can have in society, you can do in your organization. So like you could have like boards that make decision making, and those are elected. Like, do we have a representative body, or is it fully democratized? I talked about sociocracy and its offshoots, holocracy. There's another book called Humanocracy that came out recently that kind of talks about this, but it's not. It's like, somebody recently asked me about, like, okay, so this is where you're taking your consultancy, and you're talking about dismantling power in organizations, but what's the practicality? And it seems very idealistic. I'm like, it's not idealistic. It's happening, right? There's a reason why I'm going into this direction, because I see it's actually happening. It's viable. Like, a lot of people are coming together and forming these cooperative sort of arrangements, and it's all over. Like, I believe Zappos has some degree of power
Yeah.
sharing in their organization. Ace Hardware is like, one of the oldest co-ops kind of in this country. Like, I mean, it's like too many to name. Like, it's
That makes
I can
me
even
so happy to
put
hear.
together an Excel list of different.
I
Then
think
this is
I
what
would
I'm
I would
researching.
take that and like just have it as like, this is my happy place. So um so I know equity is like your super passion out of all of this. Um One of the things, the ideas that I have heard recently that I find extremely persuasive, but that I would like to get your take on and perhaps subsequently change my mind after knowing more, is that in a traditional corporate model, that the only way to solve pay inequities is to have radical transparency around pay. That you just have to basically put a sign on the door, this is what everybody makes, and then deal with balancing that and the fallout. And that until you do that, as long as you have secrets and shadows, nobody is able, you don't have a level playing field because of the things that you said, that some people's are acculturated to not have a voice. So to then turn around and be like, well, it's not our fault that they can't negotiate is bullshit. And so if you really want to be equitable and fair, the answer is that you just have radical transparency, and that without that, you can't get there. Again, radical me is like, yeah. But what is your take? Is that the only way? Is that a great way? Is that a terrible way? What's your thought?
I think that's a good interim, ideally you want to get to a point where people are adequately compensated for what they're putting in for their labor, right? Like that's the ultimate goal. And when you're thinking about that ultimate goal, there are structures where you can divvy up like wealth sharing of an organization depending on who puts in what and where that where their attention is placed. And so like you want a baseline so people can survive, right? Of course, like it's not like, oh, I'm not, I have to take off to do some other things like at home. Like, am I going to, survive this month or whatever? No, like
right.
you definitely want, for the rest of it, like there is there are different models of basically distributing wealth in an organization, and it is distributing wealth. It's not like, I'm not talking about like pay structures. So pay structures are also extremely like pay structures enforce the hierarchy, right? Like so like obviously you have individual contributor and then frontline manager like and then you go up to executive leadership and things like that. And so there's a pay structure. So that wealth contributes to that culture of capitalism. It's the core root of it. So
right.
How you're getting paid is exactly how the organization is maintained, right? So it is inextricably, like it's tied. It feeds into it. So if your pay structure is that hierarchical, you're going to have automatically you're going to have oppression somewhere, and what you have in order to dismantle it is going to be a series of interventions. You want to, those interventions are transparency in who's getting paid what. Like being able to kind of talk, providing skills for your employees to be able to negotiate. That's on the personal end, and on the interpersonal end, doing pay equity studies to make sure that there is adequate pay for, for a same level of work. But like the next level on top of that, if you want to transcend that kind of structure, and this is not something I'm an expert in distributive pay. But but there are there is evidence out there that some organizations are actually kind of doing this, where they're taking the output and wealth created by the organization and distributing it, not
hoarding it like dragons. Yeah.
What's that?
Not hoarding it like dragons or trickling it down like a water bottle in a gerbil cage, which is what they usually do. So. Yeah.
So So like to answer your question, sure. I think that that is you can't advocate for yourself if you don't know what your peers are making. If you don't know, if it's not transparent, like government does a pretty decent, does an okay job. Some government agencies are doing publishing their salaries, especially for leadership, right? Like, because these are taxpayer funded.
Yeah. And I think the changing laws in places like Colorado and all of that are forcing more and more companies to at least start by acknowledging what the actual salary band is, I think is a good place to start. But I have just always professionally and personally been mystified at why you want to begin your relationship with your employee in an adversarial way, that you're pitting yourself against them. Like I that's always seemed bizarre to me why you would make that choice as an organization, because that's essentially what a negotiation is, right? Like it's not a, hey, let's work together and figure out, how much we can give you. It's this, I'm going to get everything I can get, or I'm going to save everything I can save. And the whole thing always winds up blowing up in somebody's face, one way or the other. And it always just has struck me as innately bizarre
Yeah.
as a way to build trust with anybody.
Well, like, and we're so like, and we find it so normal because of just how we're indoctrinated into this hierarchical structure of an organization, right? You will always be at, you will always be powerless in a powerful organization, and the leaders will always be powerful, and you will always be fighting for the liberation of yourself and your labor if you are in a hierarchical organization. You can have like a benevolent dictatorship or benevolent, sort of leadership where, they're all altruistic, but still, you in hierarchies, where power and wealth is concentrated at the top, you're always fighting. You're always fighting for pay. You're always fighting for time off. You're always fighting for benefits, especially if society doesn't provide them for you. Like here in the U.S., where
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
So when I'm pro-union, right? But union is an interim step. Union is a fight for that, right? Like it is a constant. It is like your union rep is fighting for the people, right? What if I was so ingrained into the organization that I was part of it, that
Hmm.
like, I'm not fighting with anybody. I'm like having conversations and dialogue to be able to, and we're all collectively guiding this organization, and we're all collectively sharing in the wealth. There is nothing to fight for in that situation. The only thing that I'll be fighting for at that point, and in that organization, I've learned the tips and tricks of democracy, right? In my workplace, I understand democracy well, so I can translate that into societal democracy. So I can take what I'm learning and then kind of advocate for greater social safety nets, or reframing the structure of the country to serve its population better, whatever direction you want to take that. So when like it's, I don't know what to tell you. Like it's the reality. Like you will
Yeah.
always have to fight, right?
No, I
As long as
agree.
there's hierarchy. Yeah.
But again, like I'm with you on this one, right? Like I don't, there are ways, okay, fine. So your company, your corporation is set up in this hierarchical way that's going to innately make it that way. But damn, you don't have to start off on this terrible footing. It just seems to me that you could start off, you you're at the one hand saying,
Yeah.
welcome aboard. We're so excited to see you. Trust us to pay you and take good care of you and stay here for a long time, but also put them up, right? Like,
Right.
what?
Yeah.
Step
Yeah.
one, Hunger Games. Step two, Kumbaya. That seems not right.
I
And
mean, but my point is that
but it will
um,
always be that
it'll
way.
always be that way,
Yeah.
because it'll always, even if it's currently like, even if you like do the CarMax thing where like you're, price tag up front, like this is what this position is paying down to the dollar. You will eventually kind of, as the organization grows and then shrinks and grows and goes through the business cycle, it's going to make some changes to be able to. So it is going to continuously, a profit-making organization and profit-seeking organization is going to continuously look for mechanisms to increase profit. And, the workers are not, the greatest concern in that situation.
Yeah.
Eventually, the system will always win. It will always play out. These types of interventions, like my biggest thing is these types of interventions are temporary. You have to continuously, it's energy. You have to continuously energetically advocate for yourself. And even if you come to an organization and like they have the, not even the, the rate, the pay band or whatever, the pay scale online, and you're negotiating within that framework, right? It's still oppressive because obviously the fast talkers are going to
Yeah.
to win out. And typically the ones who've been fast talkers are the ones who've had, silver spoons in their mouths their entire lives. That there's nothing to lose, right? There's people who need this job are going to do what they have to do to get this job in order to provide for themselves and their families and their extended families and whatever. When you don't have too much worry, you're much more lax about it, and you can kind of go in and say, hey, like, whatever. And I've seen that happen. I've done recruiting. I started out in DEI through recruitment, and so like it was very obvious, like, the types of negotiators were out there, and it's a skill, and some people aren't taught into that. So there's a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
But like, if we can transcend all of that by democratizing the workplace as a core foundational, I mean, it takes a lot of energy in the outset to do that in order for us to like democratically choose where our resources are being allocated and how we're able to kind of create a structure where it's fair pay for work, right? It solves all of these problems, I think, right? Like
Hard sell though, because you got to get the people that are going to pay you to do this, right? I just had this mental image of you walking into the boardroom and they're excited. They're like, great.
Oh yeah.
He's here. He's going to teach us how to be better and we're going to treat our people better. And you're like, great. Step one, no more profit. And they're like, oh, and this is not going to work out for us.
Yeah, I also need to survive, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm not gonna get, but
You
like
got a
this
kid
is,
to
I mean,
feed.
but my advice to any DI practitioner is to look into the space
Yeah.
because, while union penetration is very low in this country, like it was 7% or something like that, like,
I think that's about right. Yeah.
yeah, like worker-owned cooperatives are popping up, right? Just because you have power sharing in an organization does not mean that there's not latent racial or gender identity or sexual orientation or religious problems that have stemmed from societal harm for generations that are not showing up in your workplace. The traces of old systems do show up in new systems, right? Like,
I think that is so accurate. And actually, I was talking to a manager the other day for a big company, and he was saying he's in tech because most of my recruiting is in tech, and he was thinking we know that we have a shortage of women. We know we want to have better representation. We're really trying to focus on getting more women into tech. And he was like, but man, every time I'm interviewing a woman, like they don't perform at the interview. I was like, well,
yeah,
what does that mean?
wow,
And he said, well, they're technically fine. But then when we get to the questions about, well, what would you do if, they just, they're not able to give any pushback to the client or, ask any, difficult questions. And there's no sense of like client management. I was like, okay, so now hang on. I just want to rewind this for you. You have a woman who has been taught by everything in her professional career to smile and be friendly and not to push back, but to find smiling and being friendly ways to softly catchy monkey, hope that something with the penis listens to her. And you expected her to walk into your interview and suddenly, because you said, no, this is a safe space, I swear, be like, oh, well, in that case, let me unlearn all of the things that I have learned in the last 20 years of my career and perform anew for you. And his response was, oh shit, that didn't even occur to me, which was good. I felt like that's probably the best we could hope for there.
right.
And then his question was, so how do I fix it? And then it was my turn to be a little bit stuck.
Yeah.
Because he can't single-handedly fix the whole system.
Yeah.
So what would your advice, one who is smarter than me in this space for sure, be for him?
Yeah, so this happens a lot in organizations where like they're going through their recruiting process and they ask questions that are sort of culturally difficult for different, not just gender related. So
Sure.
in some cultures you don't, it's very negative to brag about yourself, right? So some questions are very open-ended and like, tell me why you're, interested in, this, like, and these broad questions that are focused on, um, getting people to talk a lot,
Mhm.
to think of big picture things and then translate that into, I, is that going to, does that mean that that person is going to be, is perform their duties needed for that job function? No, it doesn't. Typically, so the structure of the question should be very culturally neutral. They should be very specifically focused on job roles so you want, if you want to learn more about the candidate and like have some more like kind of loose questions, sure, but don't determine their job like output based on certain things that are demographic specific, right? Like, so you know we all know about like asking questions that typically where people who are quote unquote as socially constructed alpha, right, tend to thrive in, right? Like these types of the aggressive behaviors tend to win out in these situations, and we're like, oh wow, they're confident, right? Like you set that up, in the questioning, in the question interview. So my recommendation in recruiting is like, think about this question, make it very specific, to exactly what they need to know to be able to perform this particular position. You can, situational questions are also okay, right? Like, here's the scenario. What would you do in this situation? That's fine. Obviously, like the behavioral ones are what I'm talking about, but like,
Well, and that was the question, the kind of question he was talking about. That was what got me stumped, because it was, what would you do if it was for a project manager in IT? So what would you do with blah? And what they were looking for was for somebody to come in and say, well, you have stakeholder management means sometimes tell a client no, um, or not no, but yes, but which is basically no. And they were looking for somebody to, as they were asking them, how would you handle this, to who would really kind of like give a lot of pushback. And I said, if that's
right.
your number one thing you're looking for, you're never going to hire a woman,
Yeah,
because we've taught women that they can't do that professionally
yeah,
and be at a level that it would have gotten your attention.
yeah,
So she's not going to be a 15-year veteran of the industry who's already risen to a fairly senior level doing that statistically,
right.
because we teach women they can't.
I got
And
you.
so that's where I was. And I said, he's like, well, but does that just mean that like women can never do this job? I was like, of course it doesn't. She would find a way. Like, we have learned other ways
Yeah,
to work around. Some of us just have learned that we can't work for other people because we get tired of hearing that. But for women who stay in corporate America, they have other approaches to that don't translate well for a masculine audience in a lot of ways. And I didn't know, and I still really don't, how to coach him on, or any other manager in that situation, on what to listen for those things, because it's tricky.
yeah,
And the same is true, there are a lot of, again, like you said, it's not just male, female, there are different cultures approach things in different ways, in the same way that, different humans do from the same culture. That I walk into everything like a bull in a china shop, but I'm told there are other approaches that sometimes work for people. I don't believe it, but I'm told that that's true. And so, if you know that your singular approach that is most familiar and recognizable to you is somehow culturally biased, how do you look for other approaches? I don't necessarily know how to teach you to do that.
yeah. The only thing I would say to that, and it's not something I'm kind of I guess like I'd have to kind of be in the situation, but the types of questions that that kind of you know you have approach and you have outcome, right? So like sometimes you the approach that when you're talking about the approach you're taking, you're a little cautious because like um, you have to be like, okay, so like what's I don't know the culture of this place, like I don't know how like are they super like customer always right, like very client focused, or are they more interested in kind of doing things the right way, like and so anybody is kind of having that conversation in their head. Um, Women especially, right? Like if you've been in a position where you're socialized into like, oh, you don't say the wrong thing. So if you can figure out a way to kind of phrase the question so they work backwards, so that like this is the outcome that you need. Like so this person, so this is like the issue, and then the outcome is here, right? This is where we want to get them,
How
and
do
you
you
can
get from
say,
here to there? I like that idea.
so like maybe the approach like if you find if you find them like stumbling on the approach, like you can I always say like it's you have your list of questions, you can follow up, right? You can if you see that there might be something else there, you can follow up and ask a question that kind of kind of draws you there. So maybe that might coax that individual to be like, well, we want to get them there, and they're not necessarily doing things the right way, but like we don't want to offend the client or anything like that. And that's the reasoning behind that particular approach that they took. That also is not a bad thing, right? Like they're not like pushing back is not like a complete virtue in all respects, right? Sometimes like you know um, uh,
I thought we were friends and you go and say things like that.
well, I mean, depending on what what it if it's yeah, you want to do the right thing, obviously, right? And like, but you have to also kind of you know mind the situation, right? Like sometimes um, I've been in situations, and I'm saying this as an activist. I've grown up as an activist. I did in my 20s. Like there are situations where sometimes you have to kind of pick your battles, and if the type of pushback is going to result in something minor that is like the kind of pushback is going to damage the relationship more
Yeah.
than it is, that's something to weigh out. And as shitty as it sounds, like sometimes like that's you can't be an activist all the time, 100% of the time, right? You can't be in that role of justice. Nobody can, right? And the people who are typically you know have a hard time. Like it's very difficult, right? For your own survival and for your own like kind of you know well-being, right? You're still beholden to the system. You're
Yeah.
still beholden to capitalism, right? You have to kind of for your own survival to be able to kind of feed your family, right? Like you have to bend sometimes, and
I'm still going to have to go to the store and buy food for my children using money and the tools of capitalism. And absolutely.
yeah.
I think,
But I think this is a great point, because like we're talking about like we're not talking about like truly oppressive organizations, right? We're talking about, let's call it like organizations that are well-meaning but still hierarchical, still beholden to capitalism, and organizations that still, I mean, you're not going to be not beholden to capitalism, but more liberated, right? So in the completely liberated organization, you have the power to be able to speak up and share your thoughts authentically. But in the we're talking about like how I'm talking about survival, right? I'm talking about
yeah,
getting that job. I'm talking about um, what you have to do sometimes to be able to make it. And that is the game you have to play. And anybody who's ever been in a position of harm knows that you cannot be who you truly are all the time.
I
Like
think so I think I said to you earlier, I spent 10 and a half years in the UK. And one
Yeah.
of the
The
really
accent
big,
comes out here and there.
every once in a while, my husband is British, so I blame him most of the time. But one of the things that was really interesting is in the UK, you get a contract for a job, whereas obviously we don't in the States. And with that, there's guaranteed notice periods and a whole lot of protection of your role. Whereas, of course, here I live in Texas, which is an at-will state. Good luck. And it was very, very different to work in an environment where people were not afraid that on any given day, if they pissed off their boss enough, they were just going to be fired. And it was pretty eye-opening. And then when we immigrated back, it was eye-opening for my husband the other way. He was like, wait a minute. I've been here 2 years and you're telling me they could just walk in tomorrow and say, I don't have a job the next day. I was like, oh yeah, absolutely. No notice. And he was just like, oh my God. Yeah. I can't even imagine. But I remember the first time I was in a meeting in the UK and I had colleagues who turned around and just straight up said that something that a manager recommended or thought was a terrible idea. And I think one of them even just said, well, that's just stupid. And I was like, oh, we just say that. And wow. Nobody's worried about being fired. We're good. We're good. And it was very liberating. And of course, me being me, I took it way too far and managed to become a pariah the other way. But it was fascinating to see what happens when workers are not terrified of mood swings in their management and that sort of thing, just to continue to have a job and eat and pay their bills.
Yeah. And those workplace protections, like I talk to a lot of people from Europe, and majority of our conversations it's like they do what in the U, like it's just you're always on edge here, yep. Not just because of your job, but also because like your healthcare is tied to your job, and like so many things can domino effect and just collapse with a very small thing. So like, in Europe they don't have that, But one thing I will say about Europe is that they didn't just get to social safety nets like out of the blue. They worked for it, and that work came from liberating themselves in the workplace and understanding how activism and then eventually democracy worked through their arrangements in their, both like in their social spaces. And workplace was a social space, right? So like when there was worker strikes and things like that, you pick up on what you need and what society should provide people, and then and you learn the rules of activism. You learn the way of getting things done. And so we're trying to, in this country, leapfrog into social safety nets without doing the work in our own workplace. We have to dismantle capitalism from the ground up. And the workplace is where you spend 8 hours a day, 40 plus hours a week if you're full time. That is a social space and a space of hierarchy and dictatorship. All businesses are, if there's a CEO, and even if there's like a board that advises the leadership, it's still a dictatorship, right?
Yeah.
And we're indoctrinated into that's the way things are run. So we don't know how to be Democrats, little d, in society. So what Europeans have done, they've done the work in their spaces to be able to get to the bigger picture, right? Like, so one thing and this is why I don't know if I steered the conversation in this way, but like talking about power sharing at work, this is why, we have to do this from our shared spaces, and workplace is one of those shared spaces. Otherwise, we're going to try and leapfrog. Like, yeah, we'll pass worker protections here and there, but like, those are people who we elect, who fight for it. It's going through a very problematic electoral system that like we're kind of alienated from, right? We're alienated from our own government. We're alienated from our own electoral process. Whereas let's learn how to be Democrats or learn democracy in our everyday to be able to figure out what exactly makes us happy, what exactly do we need, and how do we get there. And
Yeah.
so, you know, doing DEI work all these years, I realized like you're never going to. The system always wins. The house always wins. All of the everything that I've done, every intervention from diversity recruitment to trainings on inclusion, even anti-racism trainings, all the way to equity interventions. These are all band-aids for a problematic oppressive system. And so, like, you know, I don't have it perfected. I don't know what it looks like. I'm still developing my own model of an equity focused or DEI focused power sharing model or series of models to be able to apply. Um, I know, you know, the outcome. I don't know the approach. You know, going back to that question, right? So
Yeah.
I know what I want to see. So like right now, I'm trying to kind of develop that to make it make sense for most organizations and you know, kind of reach out to some of these organizations that are allowing for people to kind of you know, buy out their workplaces and create these worker-owned and say like, hey, you know, there's a DEI element that you're missing, right? Unions have not always been anti-racist. There's a few unions like the IWW that like are very, very pro racial equity, but not every union. Local unions have sometimes been very, very, in you know, I'm not going to get in there.
Offline, I will tell you a personal story along those lines that I think you'll find fascinating. But so yeah, so I have time for exactly one more question because we're already over time. And you were so passionate there talking about the need for grassroots change. That it brings you to one of the things I really want to hear. I am, as I'm sure you know, am very vocal about supporting and creating a better world for job seekers. I think that they get all of the wrong ends of all of the deals, right? What is, if you had one piece of advice for them in terms of, for job seekers, in terms of how to pick somewhere that's going to treat you equitably, how to influence the system and kind of actualize some power as a job seeker, what would that be?
Yeah, that's tricky because right now I mean, I think it was even easier before the murder of George Floyd because now every organization is putting out equity and race, like you know, racism statements and these kinds of things. It's hard to kind of weed through the spectacle of it all, right? The performative DEI is kind of a thing now, but you know, there's a lot like in a parallel process. There's a lot of there's more checks and accountability of organizations than I've ever seen in my entire lifetime, which is a good thing. People are going to Facebook, people are going to Twitter, people are going to Glassdoor writing about it. There's new software that's popping up. Like a friend of mine, Netta Jenkins, just came out with a platform called Dipper, and basically it is a platform for people of color to share their experiences about their workplace, right? And so it's like, you know, it's Glassdoor for anti-racism kind of thing. So like there's
Okay, I'm excited about this. Dipper, you said. Okay.
yeah, and
All right.
I'm plugging it because she interviewed me once and like I got really excited about it. So
I'm
like
excited about it because
selfish reason.
Glassdoor and Indeed are the same now,
Yeah,
which is it. That's so frustrating because, and all of them, they make their money from the companies, right?
yeah,
So they are, again, they feel like a democratic tool, but they are in fact part of the capitalistic system.
right.
So yeah, so I like the idea of an alternative that is the Dipper. So that's fantastic. I will send people that way. Make sure that I get that link. That's great.
Yeah, I can send that to you. And so like there's a number of these kind of things that are popping up, and kind of keep an eye on that. But I mean, you know, social media is your friend. Look at what, and then it's easy to kind of look at maybe not easy, but sometimes you can look at an organization and figure out like you know, where they really stand. Like, are they talking in universalisms, like, you know, like, you know, kind of alluding at the all lives matter kind of thing. or are they specifically targeting a specific issue and then writing about what they're doing to address that, right? So like, there's this there's this whole like trope about, oh yeah, younger people want to see impact, and yeah, of course they want to see impact, right? They're, it's not they want to see impact for their work. It's not like, oh, this company is destroying the planet, but it has like a nice philanthropy of working with said group in said country.
But there's Starbucks. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Like, the newer generations aren't interested in impact as it is defined by these companies. The newer generations are interested in dismantling capitalism because their lives, their kids' lives, are dependent on saving this planet and saving the people in it. And so like it's like, and another thing is like they use this impact just kind of detract from, oh yeah, they're not interested in salaries, they're interested in kind of like, no, they're interested in liberating their wealth and saving the earth and liberating their identities as well, like environment, identity, and labor. Like those are what millennials and Gen Z are interested in. Okay,
That's it. I mean, to be fair, as a Gen Xer, I would just like to say we have been dissatisfied with the system for longer than any of the rest.
That's very true.
We're very moody about all of the things and have been very clear. So
yeah. Gen X gets a bad rap for being apathetic. Like I think I've met some Gen Xers that have been like that. Like I've been like, wow, like that's you're on another level. Like I can't touch that. Like
the misanthropy is deep.
But yeah, what was the question? Sorry.
You already answered it. It was, what can a job seeker do? And you did a fantastic job of answering it. You were fabulous. Is there anything other than plugging this fantastic new website that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure to tell people about before we go?
Sure. If you're inclined, check out criticalequity.com. That's my company, Critical Equity Consulting LLC. We do a manner of a whole like suite of DEI work. Very shortly, you will see rebranding. Like I am kind of removing allusions to DEI in the aggregate, in like the big picture, and kind of steering towards this organizational justice work that I've been talking about with the DEI lens, of course, because that's my background. And so yeah, check us out if you even if you just want to kind of talk. Of course, like nothing labor wise, but if you just kind of want to chat and just kind of see where you fall and what we can provide for you. We do employee engagement surveys, DEI focused surveys. We do, our process is very data led. We do equity audits. We do lots of different types of trainings. We do equity interventions. My resources are on my site. My list of offerings are on my site. Connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Like I'm open to connections all the time, and so I love meeting new people and getting perspectives and learning things that I hadn't.
If they're not already following you on LinkedIn, they should be, because you say smart things all the time, which is quite fabulous. But yes, we'll have all of the links and everything definitely on the show notes. So we'll make it as easy as possible for people to find you, and ideally throw money at you, because I feel like we need people like you to be successful so that you can keep eating and therefore be able to speak truth to power, which is definitely needed.
Thank you. That's that's survival in this system, right? Like,
yep.
It's hard to kind of transcend that.
Wealthy benefactors also accepted. I think we should throw that out there, right? Like,
yeah.
If Bezos is listening and is like, hey, you know what? I've been to outer space. You know what I need to do now? Help a guy out to dismantle capitalism. You're welcome. You'll accept the check. Am I right?
if Jeff Bezos wants to hire me and to do some work for him that is going to make him look terrible, I will happily do that for him.
I feel like he seems to do that a lot. I mean, there was the penis rocket, am I right? So like,
yeah. Oh my God, yeah.
All right. On that note, I am going to say thank you for being on, and goodbye.
So much fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye. You've been listening to Hey, I Want Your Job. For more information on how you can get your own awesome job, visit O&H Consulting at www.onhconsulting.com. We offer incredible resumes, no-nonsense career advice, and real-world tips for landing a job in today's market. Check us out on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Insta for more insider information. Soon, you'll be hearing us say, I'm Michelle Olivier, and hey, I want your job.